Hello, everyone, and welcome to my today's presentation on hairy cellulose nanocrystals and emerging class of nanocelluloses for advanced industrial applications. My name is Sheikhi, and I'm an assistant professor of chemical engineering and by courtesy biomedical engineering at the Pennsylvania State University. And I'm the founding director of the Biosoft Materials Lab, B Small, at Penn State. Today, I'm going to talk about a newly emerged class of nanocelluloses called hairy nanocelluloses for scale inhibition, biomimetic mineralization, scale-resistant interfaces, water remediation, and also some other applications such as paper reinforcement, rheology modifications, and so forth. Conventional nanocelluloses are made from strong acid treatment of cellulose fibers to hydrolyze the amorphous regions and produce small nano whiskers. These nano rods of about 100 to 100 nanometer with a thickness of about 5 to 10 nanometer. These are called cellulose nanocrystals. We can also treat the cellulose fibers with high mechanical shear or microfluidization, for example, and produce microfibrillated cellulose or nanofibrillated cellulose. They're also called cellulose nanofibrils or cellulose microfibrils as well. The comparison between these two is really the comparison between spaghetti and rice grains. One of them are small and relatively low aspect ratio, and the other one is very large and entangled with a very high aspect ratio. These materials are very important because they can be a green replacement to many petroleum-derived materials. These materials are biorenewable, biodegradable, cost-effective, environmentally friendly, and they have a large surface area. We have revisited the synthesis of nanocelluloses by preferentially oxidizing the amorphous regions of cellulose fibers. As I mentioned, cellulose fibers are made of crystalline and amorphous regions. So what we do is to preferentially oxidize the amorphous regions using periodate and or chloride oxidation and disintegrate the cellulose fibers from the amorphous regions to cellulose nanocrystals sandwiched between two layers of highly functionalized celluloses. And we have been engineering these cellulose nanocrystals for a broad range of applications, some of which I'm going to explain today. And the emergence of hairy nanocelluloses was really pioneered in the lab of Theo van de Ven at McGill University. And I have focused on this for the past couple of years as a postdoc and then as a faculty member. So here is the chemistry of hairy cellulose nanocrystal synthesis. We start with cellulose pulp. We oxidize it, use it periodate to open the glucose ring from C2 and C3 and form dialdehyde cellulose. And then we use the dialdehyde modified cellulose as an intermediate, whether to further oxidize it with chloride to convert the dialdehyde groups to dicarboxylate and form anionic hairy nanocellulose, also called electrosterically stabilized nanocrystalline cellulose, because they're both sterically and electrostatically stabilized. We can also heat the dialdehyde modified cellulose and form sterically stabilized cellulose nanocrystals, which are dialdehyde modified, so they are non-charged. And we can also functionalize these hairy nanocelluloses with different types of amines. Here, for example, quaternary ammonium, and form a cationic hairy cellulose nanocrystal. So we go from pulp slurry to a transparent solution through this acid-free chemistries. One of the unique properties about hairy nanocelluloses is that due to the existence of these hairs, we can impart more than one order of magnitude charge content higher than conventional nanocelluloses. Here is an example of ENCC, which is functionalized with carboxylates, and the charge content is about 6 millimole per gram, which is significantly higher than conventional nanocelluloses, which typically have less than 1 millimole per gram of charge. However, our chemistry does not damage the crystalline structure if it is controlled. Of course, the reaction time and the concentrations are very well controlled. So the crystalline part of hairy nanocelluloses look very similar to the crystalline part of cellulose nanocrystals. So there are fundamental differences between conventional cellulose nanocrystals and hairy nanocelluloses. The conventional, for example, conventional nanocelluloses, if you increase the salt concentration, they undergo aggregation and eventually, if you have a high concentration of them, gel formation, physical gel formation. So you can see the increase in the size, for example, here, and the reduction in the zeta potential. For hairy nanoparticles, when you increase salt, here KCl, what happens is that these hairs actually shrink. Not only they do not aggregate, the size does not increase, but also the size decreases, as you can see here. And the reason is that we are screening the diffuse double layer around the hairs, they shrink, and the size decreases, and the colloidal dispersion remains stable. So these are highly stable at high ionic strength. One of the interesting applications that we were interested in the past years was scale inhibition. Scale is the sparingly soluble salts that are formed in water-based units, tend to adhere to the units, block the units, and increase the resistance against heat, mass, and momentum transfer. So typical treatment of these units is based on acid dissolution of these scales, which in some cases, depending on the type of the scale, the acid can dissolve the scale. However, at low pH, corrosion becomes a significant problem in industries. The gold standard nowadays is macromolecular additives, because ion exchange methods are very, very expensive. So macromolecular additives are typically made of phosphorus or nitrogen-based macromolecules. Pretty effective, but the problem is that these materials are great nutrients in water for plants and algae, resulting in the so-called eutrophication process, which is the excessive growth of these basically sea plants, resulting in the elimination of fish. So it is an environmental catastrophe indeed. There are several regulations against using phosphorus and nitrogen-based additives. So what we were interested in was to engineer cellulose nanocrystals to make the first cellulose-based anti-scalants. And for this, we use an electrochemical method in the lab, a rotating disc electrode that would rotate in a supersaturated solution. We would apply a constant voltage and monitor the current. As the scale is formed on the electrode, the resistance increases and the current decreases until the full scaling takes place and the current becomes zero. Now, if you add these industrial additives, anti-scalants, to water, what we can see is that the current remains almost constant, and observations show that there is no significant scaling on the electrode. So the reason for this is that these molecules are typically highly charged, typically highly phosphonated, and also they are very flexible. So we wanted to use cellulose nanocrystals for this because we thought that the large surface area of them and a relatively high surface charge would basically render them interesting anti-scalants. So we did that, And for cellulose nanocrystals, tempo-oxidized cellulose nanocrystals with increased surface charge, and the nanofibrillated cellulose, we observed that they do not work as anti-scalants. The current decreases, as you can see, reaches zero, meaning that the full scaling takes place. We also use the fully solubilized carboxymethyl cellulose, CMC, which has a high charge content, about 4.6 millimole per gram. But again, we did not see any scale inhibition. And the reason is that the first choice, cellulose nanocrystals and cellulose nanofibrils, do not have enough charge on them. And carboxymethyl cellulose is not a flexible molecule. So none of them are useful for scale inhibition. Maybe that is why there was no cellulose-based anti-scalant available. So what we did was to try to swim against this flow and find a solution based on hairy nanocelluloses. Well, I told you that these nanoparticles have a large charge content that we can basically start trimming these hairs with strong acids and form a range of hairy nanoparticles with different length sizes and charge content. And as we use the largest charge content of these hairy nanocelluloses, we observe that they can perform as a scale inhibitor, and their performance is comparable to industrial anti-scalants. And the reason for that is that they have a large charge content, and also their structure is now flexible because the glucose ring is open from carbon 2 and 3. So this work went on the cover of Materials Horizon and also several news agencies as the first cellulose-based anti-scalant. And the reason that these nanocelluloses perform as anti-scalant is because of the basically stabilizing the earliest stages of crystals, here calcium carbonate, and preventing the morphogenesis of the earliest stages of crystals, such as amorphous calcium carbonate and vaterite, to convert into more thermodynamically stable polymers, such as calcite, which is what we observe with conventional nanocelluloses. We have embedded these hairy nanocelluloses in several polymeric matrices to form anti-scaling membranes, and we have observed that the presence of these hairy nanoparticles increases the scaling time, meaning that scaling takes place slower. And also we have coated different surfaces with these hairy nanocelluloses and observed that we can obtain anti-scaling surfaces based on these hairy nanoparticles. Having a large content of charge, we have used these nanoparticles and engineered them to remove contaminants from water. Here is the example of copper. We have shown that we can remove about 185 milligram per gram of copper, which is more than 40 times higher than activated carbon with these hairy nanoparticles. We have converted these particles into gels and also aerogels for water treatment. We are now interested in body fluid treatment, for example, with these nanoparticles, and we have obtained a large removal capacity with these nanocellulosic platforms. Also, as coatings, we have used them in nanocomposites and cross-linked them with ammonium zirconium carbonate, as I show here, and improve the properties of paper, the mechanical properties of paper, by about 1 order of magnitude. Another interesting application before I finish is rheology modification. We have shown that by engineering the colloidal interactions between these hairy nanoparticles, we can significantly control the viscoelastic properties of hydrogels within about 5 to 6 orders of magnitude. If these particles repel each other, they're engineered, if they are engineered in a way that they repel each other, they prevent the network formation, and if they are engineered in a way that they nicely attach to each other, they actually increase the viscoelastic moduli of hydrogel networks. So to conclude, I would like to say that nanoengineering cellulose fibers can be obtained via facile chemistries that I showed you to produce hairy cellulose nanocrystals, which overcome several limitations of conventional nanocelluloses, providing a green platform for a broad range of industrial applications, some of which I mentioned today very, very briefly in this talk. If you are interested in learning more about hairy nanocelluloses and other applications of them, please go ahead and send me an email. I will be more than happy to talk about hairy nanocelluloses with you, and hopefully I can convince you that hairy cellulose nanocrystals can be the future of nanocelluloses and green nanotechnology. Thank you very much. I wish you are healthy, and I hope to see you in person next year. Take care. Bye-bye.